All right. So to talk to us about June Jordan as method implications for deliberalizing, I practice that. Black feminism is Monaye Johnson. Monaye Johnson is a PhD student in African American Africana Studies and a master's candidate in art history. She researches reproduction, affect, Black feminist theory, and performance theory. Without any further delay, we bring to you Monaye Johnson. Please give some love in the chat to our guest. Sure.
Thank you. I am really happy to be back, and I'm grateful for the organization for inviting me. It feels really special to be able to talk about a woman, a writer, a poet who at least brought me into a lot of my consciousness raising. I think June Jordan is a really important figure to study when thinking about the Black feminist tradition, when thinking about the canon, whether it be thinking about Black feminists who were located in New York, thinking about her as someone with Caribbean ancestry. She was the descendant of immigrants. I believe both of her parents were Jamaican, if I'm not mistaken. And she just thought very critically about a lot of the things that we're talking about today. And so I was really happy to be invited to talk about her a little bit. If you know me, you know that I have talked about June Jordan a lot of times. I've been able to really speak about her work in many, many different ways. I've talked about her poetry. I've talked about her being a city planner and being really deeply invested in architecture, her methodology and pedagogy around what it meant to teach children, just what she did with her poetry programs, as well as her strong anti-imperialist stances. But today I kind of want to put a little bit of a remix on how I normally talk about her. And hopefully you all vibe with it. It's okay. At the end, you tell me you're really not feeling it, stick to the other way. I will receive that feedback with graciousness. So let me start. For those of you who may not know, I want to give you a brief rundown into her personal life because I think so much of her personal life was brought into the work. And so June Jordan was a survivor of sexual assault, actually twice. If you want to know more about what that meant for her, I recommend reading the essay Many Rivers to Cross, as well as a lot of her other poetry that really speaks to this. She was a woman who received what she called bad abortions, meaning, not having access, but still needing to get an abortion and living with the health consequences of that. She was loved and taught and mentored by Fannie Lou Hamer, as well as being able to be taught directly and interviewed Malcolm X. So she was heavily, heavily, heavily taught by some people that I know folks on this call admire. June Jordan regarded her father as her first bully, which I think is really important when we think about how a lot of Black children actually come to understand what an abuse of power is. Usually, the first understanding we have with abuses of power are quite intimate. It's probably in our home, in our schools, something like that. So I think it's really significant to identify a parent as your first bully. She lived in the projects. She grew up in Bed-Stuy. She lived in Harlem. Her husband was a white man who ended up leaving her with her son. She wrote about that a lot. June battled breast cancer for over 10 years. That's actually how she died. And so she is in the tradition of Black women writers who were actually writing while they knew that they were dying. And I think that's why you see such a sense of urgency. And I mean, across all of her writings, but I think you really see a sense of urgency around the same time that she's also facing her own mortality. And you can really tell that the method of the pen and of writing became increasingly urgent to her. And I don't think we can separate that from her. Her mother died by suicide. This was also in Many Rivers to Cross. And I think that if there was any essay I could recommend, personal essay of hers, I always go to that one because I actually think she gives us a lot to grapple with around gender, around abuse, right? Around what it means to deal with parental wounds, around how we make sense of victimization, and so much more is in that essay. She grappled with identity a lot, being a bisexual woman, being both black and woman and bisexual. She thought about that a lot. She was a deep lover and protector of children, and you will see that across her work, in her children's books and just the methodology that she had. So that's my spiel about who she is as a whole person. Now, before I really dive into it, I want to say that I think when we take up scholars like June Jordan, Toni K. Bambara, the Audre Lordes, et cetera, I think it's really important that we don't deify, we don't extract quotes, that we actually look at their work as a whole and we think about not just what their political views were, but what are the sets of methods that they used to achieve whatever goals that they had. What was the form that they were drawn to for particular messages, right? June Jordan was not, she didn't have a PhD, but she started off as a journalist. She interviewed, right? She wrote. She called herself, similarly to Audre Lorde, she considered herself a warrior poet. There were moments where when she was over at, I believe, California, either Berkeley, she would help students create plays, right? So thinking about the different form, why does something have to be communicated in a poem versus something needing to be published in a literary magazine, right? Versus something being a joint article with students or something being work that she just published of her student. I think when we actually sit with what it means to be able to communicate a message to Black people, and to also push people further to the left, we have to really think about beyond just being right. Right, because I do think a lot of people struggle with that. Beyond just being right, do we actually want to move people? And I don't think I need to lecture y'all about that. I think if you are affiliated with MXGM, a lot of the principles and the way they move really reflect to me a lot of how June Jordan moved. And so I say all this to say, I think that we are in one of the most dangerous, or I would like to say, one of the most dangerous time periods for the Black feminist tradition. And I say that because we are at a moment of what I call affective capture. I think that our theories, our slogans, our words, all the things that used to implicate some type of radicality or possible revolutionary potential have been rendered useless to an extent, meaning you can deploy a term and we don't have any consistent idea of being able to recognize what that term means anymore. We really don't know. The framework has been used for anything and everything. It has been reduced to identity reductionism, not identity politics, identity reductionism, and it has been made to stand in for whatever people feel. And feelings are fickle. Feelings are not trustworthy all the time, but more importantly than that, feelings can be manufactured by the state, by the empire, by those in power. So we can't just go off, well, this is how I feel, and so then it must be true. And so what we have to do is think about what is it within the framework that has given too much opening to that kind of behavior? And how do we put a stop to it? Is it possible to regain some sense of cohesiveness over our language? If, as Black feminists, we are architects of language, and it is our job to help decipher between the state propaganda and to actually speak to the people and to actually communicate what's happening in our communities, then we need to be the first cup. We need to be on the front lines of what it means to attack language back and to take back control over the meanings of our words. So when we say that something is Black feminist, it can no longer be whatever the fuck we want it to be. It actually has to be something serious. It can no longer be synonymous with whatever state program we want it to be. It can no longer be synonymous with what we need to keep our nonprofit funding together or to keep our department funding, right? These things are not working. And more importantly, the Black feminist tradition cannot afford to be collapsed into the self-help apparatus. That is not all that we are meant to do. We can help people, right? And we can be some sort or semblance of healing, but that is not the point of what we do. What we are supposed to be is a political framework that is against anti-Black patriarchy, that is against white supremacy, that is against imperialism, and so on and so on and so on. And we cannot lose sight of that. And so when I pose the question of was June Jordan one of the last Black feminists with courage, it's not about a ranking of who's the most radical, but it is actually looking at has the tradition been rendered so liberal? Have we lost to the liberal facet of our movement, of our tradition? That we now need to reconsider where we are in this tradition. And I think that becomes even more urgent when we think about the fact that we are writing, we are learning, and we are organizing in a post-Obama period. Why do I think that this is important? I think this is important because if we take up Hortense Spiller seeing the commemorative, and I talked about this when I came last year, the commemorative as a stopping point, which means I think we can look at the inauguration of Obama as one of the biggest Black celebratory moments that there have been within the last, say, 20 years, okay? If we look at that as mainstream Black politics, as some folks thinking that is a stopping point, we got it. We put a Black man at the head of this country. That is for the most liberal among us, that was it. That was the moment, right? That was what led to a crying Jesse Jackson. That was what did the Black people say online? That our ancestors' wildest dreams, right? That's their definition of freedom that we are competing with, right? What we are competing with is a set of feelings, structures of feelings that folks have around the image of Obama, the image of Ketanji, the image of Michelle, the image of Kamala, and so on and so on. We're competing with those structures of feeling. And I think that that affective capture is what we really have to attack when we think about what is the function of Black women's subjectivity. This becomes a really important question because there are some iterations or some writings within the tradition that may have made sense in a pre-Obama period. They may have made more sense when the women or people before us were writing them down. But now, when we think about where we are, is this the kind of method that we need to be taking up? And so, what I'm really asking us to do is go through the tradition and ask ourselves what made sense in the time period that it was deployed, or maybe it didn't, but what no longer makes sense anymore. And for me, I think that leads me to thinking about the ways in which Black feminisms was really dealing with this question of subjectivity, self-reflexivity, the self, and structures of feeling. Because if we allow people to think that everything they feel is just justified. And therefore, whatever politic you project on top of that feeling that thus speaks to your personhood and your subjectivity is therefore valid, what we have is just liberalism running amok. And I think that we have that today. But more importantly, what we have is a state and other right-wing formations being able to attach themselves to that. That's how you get things like girl boss rhetoric. That's how you get people thinking that the most important thing after October 7th is just the simple election of a Black woman and the figurehead of that, as opposed to a sustained set of politics around what we are going to do with this country committing genocide. I hope I'm making a little bit of sense. If I'm not, definitely tell me in the chat. And you can always tell me in the chat if it's just given, to take down the PhD. I'm very open to that as well. But I really hope y'all are understanding what I mean when I'm talking about the issue of affect in our particular moment. And this is how I think you can have people stray so far away from the Combahee River Collective statement and to just be bastardizing identity politics to this extreme set of identity reductionism that we have. June Jordan said things like, sometimes I am the terrorist that I need to disarm. June Jordan said we need to have living room politics. June Jordan was the one who said, from Brooklyn to Angola is not a big leap for the opposition. So why is it for you? That's how we need to be thinking about this. To me, that's the method. If it is not difficult for our opposition, right, to think from Harlem to Palestine, from Harlem to Nigeria, from Harlem to Israel, if our opposition understands why they need to do that simultaneously, why don't we? June Jordan posed that question years ago, right? June Jordan was the one who wrote for the people of Lebanon. She wrote why I had to go to Nicaragua. She spoke about Palestinians. She didn't just speak about Palestinians. She wrote Intifadada USA long before October 7th. She was still willing to do that. And she was also willing to pay the price for the things that she wrote and she said. June Jordan was someone who, during New York City's era, they call it the era of free tuition in New York City schools. June Jordan was the one when they decided they were going to remove that policy. She went on a 3-day hunger strike. When I ask the question of was she the last Black feminist with courage, I'm asking us to consider what actually constitutes revolutionary risk in 2026 and what will constitute that moving forward. And for a lot of people, they think the bar is just having more radical rhetoric or a better analysis. I don't even think that that's enough. I don't think any framework or any movement or any organization is above affective capture. Are we actually being the public educators that we say that we are and the organizers that we say we are, or are we falling victim to what it feels like to emote revolutionary politics? Are we emoting? Do we feel it and therefore it just is, but the action around that really isn't happening? Have we told ourselves empire will fall and therefore we feel that way? So we show up for our PowerPoints on a Thursday evening, but that's it, that's all. Everybody has to answer to that, whether you think you are a Marxist, a socialist, or a Black feminist, or an Afro pessimist. None of us are above the simple fact that our words are being distorted and we're losing the meaning of them. And we can deploy a term and not know what the fuck we're talking about. That's my spiel. So let me look at the chat for a second because y'all are talking to me, but I gotta see. Someone said this is how you even get intersectionality, no shade. Okay, talk. Yes, please say more. So, yes, feelings can be manufactured. Yes. Good inquiry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yes. I haven't had anybody say put the PhD down yet, so I think we're on the right page so far. So let me go back a little bit to some of the work from June Jordan that I think can really help us think about how we can do this work. And so, one of the things that I really do recommend that people read, well, you should read all of her if you have the opportunity, but I do really recommend Life as Activism. I recommend Directed by Desire. I recommend all the work that looks at that unique time at City College with Audrey, Tony K, Bambora, Rich, and June all in one because they were really struggling over pedagogy, which is really important. And I really recommend we think about her anti-imperialist stances within the Black feminist tradition and we ask ourselves, how did we I don't want to say that we lost that because that's not fair. There have always been and there will always be people, but I would say on sort of a popularity front, what is it that made for a brief period of time, what is it that made people gravitate so much to say an Audre Lorde, but not necessarily a June Jordan politic? I think there's something around affect and affective enclosure that can help us answer those questions. The people are going through the Black feminist tradition and they are just pulling from whatever makes them feel, particularly whatever makes them feel good and whatever reflects themselves back to them. We're looking at the Black feminist tradition and we're looking at writers like June Jordan and so many other people. And what we want is to see a mirror. And I don't fault people for that because a lot of the tradition is around that. But I'm saying, how do we move beyond that at this time? If the revolutionary question or erotic question on the table is we need to make the revolution sexy, we need to make people want to identify with us. To me, that's a really big question, y'all, because we are competing with someone in the chat, please let me know who his name was, who literally just did the podcast and said, I don't give a fuck about all that activist shit. Jay-Z taught us how to make money. I think we actually need to take that serious because, like my comrade Zalika says, Black people are not rhetorical gestures in our work. Something, something else has to happen beyond just suffering that makes people want to identify with a more radical, more revolutionary, and more leftist framework. It is not just the knowing of information. It is not just beating them over the head. It's not just ridicule. It's not gonna just be putting on teach-ins and hoping that they show up. But really, how do we get people to find what we believe more compelling than the insidious, erotic, compelling nature of the Black misleadership class? How do we get people to want to identify with the June Jordan and her work when we're living at a time where you can prop up your phone and just promote TikTok shop and maybe instantly be able to pay your rent? I think that these questions all lead me back to the same thing. If we are at this moment of extreme effective capture, and the state knows that, which is why they've made sure that every algorithm we come across keeps us in this constant loop of affect, we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, then how do we disrupt that? And then how do we deal with the positive affect that Black people may have towards the things that are in direct opposition to us? And the question becomes more and more urgent as our conditions worsen. Um, all right, let me read. Someone said I recommend Open Emissions, The Poetics and Pedagogy of Toni K. Bambara, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, and Adrienne Rich in the Era of Free College. Yes, I actually read some of that today, and I was going to talk about that a little bit. But, and that's also where I read about her 3-day hunger strike and, the way she struggled with pedagogy and all of that. So I really think we should do that. So June Jordan had this sort of method in her work where I gave you the word living room politics, meaning that she wanted people, when you read her work, when you heard her poetry, I believe that she wanted people to feel like what may be far away in the distance, another country, another land that you may never get to, feels so intimate to you that it feels like it is right in your living room. That was something that she tasked herself in with her work. That's why she wrote about apartheid in South Africa, right? That's why she did all the things that she did. She connected the struggles and she made it feel like, hey, it's happening here, it's happening there, doop, 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 doop. What she also did was recognize that power can move. And she owned, sometimes she may be the one in the dynamic of power. Sometimes it may be the role of Black Americans or those in the imperial core to do a specific set of strategies or to have a certain type of response that may be different to those bearing the brunt of empire, right? She helped guide her students through that. Sometimes I believe she had this orientation of what she called, you're looking up at the ceiling and I need you to look up at the sky. When we ask ourselves that as educators, does it shift the way that we engage with people? Will we change? And that's what I mean when I say, do we want to be right or do we want to help move people? And so when we see that opportunity as educators, if you identify as such or organizers, and we take up that method of, okay, I see somebody is looking up at the ceiling, but I have to get them to look up at the sky. How do we do that? How do we teach and move in that way? How do we write in that way? And how do we do it in ways that don't just lead them to brack around to me, the structural enclosure of affective enclosure? How do we do that? How do we get out of one, I think, is revolutionary politics that are also just emotive, right? That just feeling. Bell Hooks cautioned us against what she called lifestyle feminism. I want to extend that to all frameworks. Are we contributing to the aestheticization and the lifestyle of our politics? Has organizing become curatorial as opposed to something that is actually shifting these scales of power? When we start asking these questions, I think that more people will be able to see why I find affect to be so dangerous during these times. And so, again, returning to this ethos that she had, you're looking up at the ceiling, and I need you to look up at the sky. Automatically, to me, the way I move would be so different. I can't beat you over the head to get you to look at the sky. Well, maybe depending on the circumstances, I might have to, right? I might have to explore a wide variety of things to get you to look up at the sky. I might have to, okay, this form is not working. So I have to do a different form. This makes me think a little bit about Sylvia Wynter. If you go through Sylvia Wynter's work, she did the plays, right? She did the long form writings. She did a whole host of things. And I think that the different ways in which writers choose to communicate, to me, are sets of methods that we should study. When she takes up the important essay of Nobody Mean More Than Me Than Willie, when she has a student who loses a loved one to police violence, and she chooses the moment to one, have her students write about that. But and then for her to also write about that, and then to also let them write about that in their own Black English. There are a whole sets of reasons behind that method. And what she is giving us is methods around a more radical pedagogy, or more radical way of learning, a more radical way of political education than I think that we have now. And I'm going to keep stressing that those of us who think that we are on the far left, we are not exempt to that. We have a movement apparatus of podcasts right now. We got to think about what that does to us affectively. Your mama might be watching The Breakfast Club. You might be turning on Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. What do we have in common? We two niggas listening to a podcast. What do we do after that? That's really okay. I'm going off on a tangent. I'm sorry. Anyways, back to this is what happens when Z leaves me unsupervised. But the point still stands because I'm talking about affect, okay? But I want us to think critically about that because it is not just the Black feminist tradition that needs to answer to the question of liberal co-optation. We all do. And so much of how liberals are able to co-opt and destroy the meaning of our words and render them incohesive as fuck is because to me, is because it all returns to these structures of feeling. So we have to think about that. Again, this is no secret. We always talk about the question of what are the limits of our subjectivity? What are the limits of our individual perspectives? June said, my individual perspective is not enough. And I think that's something that we have to keep pushing. How do we get folks to read a poem such as a poem about police violence, where June Jordan calls for very militant things, and she does it through poetry, but it's still a militant call. If you have not read a poem about police violence, she poses the question: if every time they kill a little Black boy, what would happen if we killed a cop? What she's talking about is the redistribution of the burden. That's what she's talking about. That's the method that she's actually putting on the table. And what we need is we need for people to hear that poem and read that poem and not just walk away feeling like they can breathe and that their grief has been reflected back to them, which is important. I'm not discounting that. But that to me, people are stopping there. And so I'm trying to figure out how do we get them to actually pick up the sets of methods that these revolutionary writers were giving to us beyond the affective stopping point, like I kept saying. And I think that that is really important. And so there is so much more that I feel like I could tell you all about June Jordan. I could tell you, read you a poem about my rights where she says that she has been made the meaning of rape and I could ask you to consider the implications of that for Blackness. I could take you to her poem or essay, Many Rivers to Cross, where she says that her father was a man who couldn't tell the living from the dead. What does that mean for abuse in our families? What does it mean that we have people walking around who can't tell the living from the dead? What do we do with that? Right? I can ask you to go through um her entire perspective on how we should teach children and how she workshopped with children and why she did the things that she did. I can ask you to consider the way she spoke about city planning. I can ask you to go back and look in the archives about her programs, Poetry for the People, right? There's so much we could do in this hour. But what I want you to take away from today, if there's anything at all, is what are we doing about this notion of affective capture? And is there something about our work that indicts us in this problem as well? And two, if we're supposed to be making the revolution sexy, or rather making people identify with revolutionary politics, then to me, I think we are up against affective capture in the sense that there is just a lot more affective than us, affective and effective appearing than us. And how do we fight back against structures of feeling when they feel so innate to the person? Obama was a structure, a head of an empire, and so on and so on. But before he got there, Obama was a feeling. Obama was an essence, a feeling. How do we compete with that? Or should we even be competing with that? Is the question that I'm going to close folks with, and that I'm asking us to revise the Black feminist tradition to sort of address in ways that everybody can be a part of, not just those of us enclosed in the academy or those of us who already have the revolutionary politic, but thinking more broadly about Black people in general. And so I'm going to stop there. And I hope that made sense. And that wasn't just a PhD tangent. And I'm going to let y'all ask me questions.
All right, thank you, Monet. Give some love in the chat. Yes, you were. I don't know if you could see the chat, but you were bringing it, asking the questions around what constitutes revolutionary risk. There's a couple questions in the question and answer that we'll get to. And I want to invite folks to ask their questions in the question and answer if you can. And then we'll try to take as many as we can till we get up to the hour. We get run out of questions. But one of the questions in the chat, and I think you got at it, but maybe we want to give you a chance to address it directly. Comes from Hope J, and the question is, what creates effective enclosure? And I guess maybe if you can even give some little detail about what you mean when you say by that even more directly.
Yeah, I think I'm working on this. I think what I mean by effective enclosure is, to me, it goes back to the structure of feeling being a stopping point where it's just, I feel this, so it must be true. So one example I can give is it's when we say things like, it's inevitable this empire will fall. And so we feel that and we wake up every day. And so we claim that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. That's something that we should have. But what about that feeling might be actually making us stop to the point where we take what we're saying and feeling as an inevitability that does not need any of our weight behind it? That is kind of what I mean about this essence of affective enclosure. On the other side, there's this kind of affect where whatever I think, whatever I feel, because I feel it, then it is true. And if I build something upon what I feel, then it must be justified. To me, I think that gets us in really dangerous territory when we think about the function of our subjectivity. The state knows you can feel bad just as much as the state knows that you can feel good. There were pleasure politics involved in slavery. Saadia Hartman taught us that, right? And so we have to be very conscious of structures of feeling, just as much as the politics, but the feelings around them as well.
Right. Every time we talk about that, I just what I hear in my head is vibes, and and you're right. This idea around kind of feeling right. I'm like, oh yes, that's when I hear anybody talk about late stage capitalism.
Yeah.
And it inevitably, like you said, and then we just kind of wait out the clock, if you will. All right, we got about five questions in the Q&A. Um, First one asks around, can you point us to some of June Jordan's writings on children that you think would be important for Black parents to engage?
Yeah, I can I come back to that one because I actually what I would like to do is so for Black women radicals, I did make a reading list for June Jordan. So if you Google that, my recommendations will come up. And then there's also the June Jordan archive on Instagram that posted a lot of those sections as well. But it's in a lot of her anthologies. So Life as Activism, um, some of us did not die and things like that. It's in there.
Next question. Can you what was Miss Jordan's alliance? Was Miss Jordan in alliance with any other Black female writers?
Oh, yeah. I think that was a very, prolific time for Black feminism. I mean, she was at the same at City College the same time as Tony K. Bambara, right? Like that was her mentor. If you, some people say they consider Fannie Lou Hamer a feminist. Some people don't. I don't want to touch that today. But she was mentored by Fannie Lou Hamer, and I think she wrote her biography. So she was really with Fanny along the writing side. And again, it's in the chat, the book that that person suggested. All of them kind of ran as a crew a little bit, or at least things like that. June saw a lot in the writings of Alice Walker. And so even if you go throughout the archive, you see that whole generation of Black women writers being together at these writing retreats, at these poetry events, and so on and so forth. I hope that answered the question.
From Gabriel, do you think that the institutionalization of Black feminist theory has been the main de-radicalizing force? If so, how do we mitigate this?
Um, yes and no. Um, yes, undeniably yes. That is a strong part of it, but to me there is something around um why do people still kind of think Black feminist writings are supposed to be their therapy, And what is it about that? And we could think about gender, but we also have to think about kind of what is being written there that I think to me is contributing a little bit more to the problem. And that's why it was so important for me to say, like, we have to stop deifying these people. I think for a lot of times we just wanted to keep the work alive. And so you want to keep spreading it and you just want, hey, this writer existed. They're on my wall. I have a picture of them, right? I have a poem printed out. But what we actually need is for folks to actually critically engage. And I think that that's more important. If I am so passionate about what I do that when, June, there's an article, I'll try to drop it in the chat. One of her previous students talked about one of the final years of June Jordan's teaching before she died. And he spoke about, going to her house and seeing just how many pills she had to take on a daily and just how tired she was. And he talked about this moment in the classroom where because she didn't say anything to these two students going back and forth about Palestine, she didn't speak exactly in that moment, that a student actually called her out for it. And she contemplated not coming back to class. But she ended up coming back to class. And I think he did say that was like the last year of her life, or maybe that was the last year he saw her. You'll have to check that. But for me, the point is if I'm working and writing as I am dying from cancer, I have got to believe that there is something that I need to say or communicate that I am hoping that the next generation actually takes up. That's not for you to just print out and put a picture of me on your wall in your altar. That ain't enough. To me, that contributes to what I mean about that affective enclosure. I want you to actually consider what I said and what I put on the table. And so what I want is for us to stop thinking that Joan Jordan's poetry is just supposed to make us feel good on the anniversary of her birthday, and to actually comb through it and think about what is she telling us that we might need to do. That to me is more important.
Absolutely. All right. Jonathan asks, would you speak more about, I guess, what you call the movement apparatus of podcasts? But can you speak about how you see podcast culture feeding effective enclosure or even social media?
Yeah, so let me be very clear. That was not shade. I listen to all the podcasts. I get my education. I think it's really important. I said that because I don't want us to just think because we see ourselves using more revolutionary terms that we are out of what I'm talking about. That's why I named that. And again, kind of what you were saying about when we just take up the inevitability of something, but like the weight really kind of isn't around it. I think that's really important. I think the same way it feels good for your mama or your sister or your cousin to laugh at the Poor Minds podcast or the Breakfast Club, I think for us it can feel emotive and it can feel good to hear what we want to hear, right? So I don't think we're out of this shifting thing of these structures of feelings. I think that the insidiousness of, to me, liberalism is that it can appear even when we don't see it yet. And I die on this hill that radical rhetoric is still just rhetoric. And it is nice that we prioritize political education. But I also know that as the stakes get higher and higher and the conditions get worse and worse, we're going to need a lot more than that. And so when somebody like Joy James asks us, okay, I see hearts expanding, I see people getting smarter, et cetera, what's the strategy? That's a real question on the table to me for 2027. What is the point of escalation? To me, having to figure out with a bunch of niggas in one room what is the point of escalation is a lot harder than us coming in the room to fight over what is the dialectical materialism and what is scientific socialism. We need that, but what I'm saying is, yeah, that's what I mean. And so, like I said, it's no shade. I love me a podcast. I love political education. We got to get it how we get it. But I just don't want us to think that we are outside of the problem either. Lifestyle politics can creep in on anybody.
All right. I'm like, man, you must have been in some of the meetings I was in. You are speaking my life, killing me softly. All right. Our last question, unless folks have some more, is what role does ritual play in this concept of effective capture? I'm thinking about my experiences in the church as a materialist. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing to feel what they feel, but not exactly due to me knowing it's a combination of the setting, the music, and the people. Anyway, could you speak to this?
Hold on, child. That's a question I gotta read myself.
Right.
Hold on.
Yeah, so there's a question and a story in there about being in church and feeling it, but not, but maybe having a different experience.
Okay, so this first part of the question of what role does ritual play in this concept of affective capture, thinking about my experience in the church as a materialist is interesting. I think we feel what we feel as a combination of the setting, the music, and the people. Yeah, I want to be honest, I don't have an answer to your question just yet. I'm really thinking about affective capture and I'm really just thinking about affect these days. It may be what my dissertation might be on, it may not be, but I've actually just been sitting in this sort of double-edged sword feeling that this word is giving me, and I've been trying to understand it for myself as it relates to not just the Black feminist tradition, but a lot of Black traditions, right? And so I'm really trying to work with the dangerousness of feeling because affect to me, like I said, is so dangerous because we all think in some ways that it is ours. And I think each time we consistently underestimate who or what it's actually been manufactured by. And so I've been trying to work through that. So I don't want to answer your question just too yet because even for myself, I think I have a lot more reading to do before I'm able to really give you an answer on what I think. Because like I said, everything that I've mentioned today, I'm not saying throw it away or that we don't need it. But what I am saying is, even in myself, I feel like, right, structures of feeling, something is happening. And I'm trying to put my thumb on it.
All right. I think we have worked our way to our through all of our questions. So we have a few minutes. I don't know if you have a closing statement or where you want to end the lecture.
Don't go tell them people I said I don't like their podcast. That's not what I said. But in all seriousness, I just do hope that people read June Jordan, take her up, and just think about what it's going to mean to steward the next generation of Black feminist politics. That's it.
Shay. May it be so because we made it so, right? If we got the lesson in Jude Jordan's method. Again, let's give some love to Monet in the chat. For once again a powerful lecture. For those who asked, the the lecture will be up on the By Any Means Necessary YouTube channel within the week, so you can go back and catch all the hot fire and send people clips of the hot takes around that. So then where we go from here is that we wanted some time, so we'll close, and then those who are attending the summer school will get the summer school open at 8 o'clock, and we'll have this our set of courses there, and then for next week we will be joined. Our lecture will be first, the last, and these two statements summarize the dramatic narrative and unfolding between Western fundamentalism and the unfinished anti-colonial revolution. So this is going to be Professor Felicia coming to talk to us about that. I believe also touching a little bit on Fanon. So join us next week for that. And so with that, we're going to stop our record.